Bob Caldicott became an office boy for the ABC in Adelaide in the 1920s and progressed through much determination to become a key radio announcer and commentator, especially during major events and royal visits to Australia. His popular Remember programs on radio were one of the many highlights, and with TV commencing in early 1960, became a key newsreader on Channel 2. Towards the end of his career, he published a book entitled I'm Speaking to You, aptly named as it was his usual introduction during outside broadcasts. I'm speaking to you from the Shrine of Remembrance, and so on. The publication was reminiscent of days in early radio and television and the groundbreaking developments of both eras. At one time, he read his entire book on Radio 5RPH in Adelaide, radio for the print handicapped, and it's from those recordings that we feature a chapter entitled It's Only a Joke.
We always seem to have at least one practical joker on the staff. I know that many regard the practical joker as an immature person who is, as often as not, a pain in the backside. And indeed, we can all do without the unfunny incident that hurts or embarrasses its victim. Almost all of us were shift workers who sometimes, because of the separated program commitments, had idle times. It was then, out of boredom, that we often livened up the proceedings with some untoward behaviour. Another highly ingenious practical joker was Keith Burks. Keith was an absolute wizard with a tape recorder. With patient editing, he could put together the most extraordinary combination of sounds and voices, and the result of much of his work was hilarious in the extreme. I am indebted to Keith for reminding me of many of the following anecdotes. One of the early morning announcers was much given to loud and continuous belching, which of course was not heard by the listening public, as he always switched off his microphone at the appropriate times. One operator thought it sad that, as the studio sign said on the air, listeners were being deprived of the full meaning of the words. One morning he patched out the microphone through the control booth so that even when the announcer cut his microphone switch, the operator could still switch it on in the booth.
Well, Mrs. Burke, Murray Bridge, that's the number you requested. Music, 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 sung by Petula Clark. And don't be shy about writing.
The effect was dramatic. The announcer let fly with a resounding belch that shook the rafters, made all volume measuring meters flap hard over, and gave a tired operator the feeling that it was good to be alive. Incidentally, no one phoned in to complain. Our technical boys had many facilities available to them for perpetration of harmless pranks. There were, for instance, the monitoring lines that fed from the radio switch room, the nerve centre of the technical area, to all the studios, as well as the technical workshops and the engineering front office. It was possible to superimpose over or completely obliterate the off-air program sound by patching the output of a tape recorder into this system, with the result that all these monitor points heard extraneous sounds that were never part of the broadcast program. The perpetrators knew to the split second how long it took the supervising engineer to walk from his office to the workshop and peer over his glasses at a bunch of technicians and trainees working like drovers' dogs with no trace of any recording device in sight. Even the observatory time signal, the 6 pips which we used to have years ago, that used to signal the half hour in our transmissions from time immemorial, was not immune. Especially was this so when the announcer said,
"This is the ABC broadcasting through 5CL Adelaide and the regional stations. The time is 2:30. Here's the observatory time signal."
On one occasion, an edict came down from Sydney to the effect that the pips needed some adjusting, that they were too short and not clearly discernible, and that they should be lengthened to the precise duration of half a second on and half a second off. The senior technician assigned to this idiotic task borrowed a highly sensitive oscilloscope and set it up in the switch room so that he could measure the pips to 500 milliseconds and adjust the relay in question. Whenever he remembered, he'd gallop into the switch room with only seconds to spare to peer into the oscilloscope as the pips came on and make the necessary adjustments with his screwdriver. Here was an opportunity not to be missed. Every now and then, a great variety of taped versions of long pips, short pips, mixed pips, pippy pips, speeded up and slowed down pips were fed into the monitoring line to the oscilloscope, where a stunned senior technician sat watching a mishmash of crazy traces that bore no resemblance to the pips he heard going to air. Another officer was helped on his way to early retirement. There was a certain supervisor of the outside broadcast section whose office led off to the main workshop. This fellow's stomach was tuned in to the noon news theme, from which he took his cue for lunch. There was always a monitor on somewhere in the workshop, and the moment he heard the opening bars of the majestic fanfare, he was out of his chair. Virtually in one action, he reached up for his lunch bag with one hand, grasped the doorknob with the other, and bounded up the stairs to the canteen, making sure he was first in line for a cup of tea. He was a Monty for the following joke to be pulled on him. A tape containing a news service of doubtful vintage was queued up and set for patching into the monitor speaker. The wall clock was moved forward from 11:45 a.m. to noon. The tape was started, and all eyes were down, concentrating on work. Right on cue, our friend was out of the door and up the stairs. Naturally, his early arrival at the canteen, demanding a cup of tea, was met with justified hostility, and by the time he'd woken up to the realization of the situation and returned to his office, the wall clock had been corrected, and there was a room full of diligent workers. Any query on his part was met with a look of disbelief and a comment as to his degree of sanity. Hindmarsh Square saw some strange sights in the early days. It was not uncommon to see 3 or 4 fools dressed in tatty grey dustcoats pushing a trainmobile around the footpaths and across the tram lines to Football House, which was the home of other ABC offices, studios and the recorder room. This trainmobile, a specially built mobile workbench belonging to the maintenance team, was equipped with testing instruments and drawers jammed with spare parts, and made regular trips in response to calls from the ABC's music supervisor. After receiving a typical message, "There's a sort of rattle in the speaker," the ever-willing fix-it lads would spring into action, eager for a legitimate excuse to see daylight and eye any talent that might be passing through the square. They would rumble their trainmobile across the square, dodging traffic snarls and rattling any fine adjustment on the testing equipment into oblivion. Once established in the music supervisor's office, they would take some time to remove the back from his huge Altec Lansing speaker, then settle themselves down behind the unit for a smoke. After an hour or so, they'd close it all up and call the supervisor back to his office, having laid not a finger on the internal workings. The gentleman in question was said to have perfect pitch and was capable of hearing distortion that could never be measured. His judgment was conclusive. If he needed any proof that parts had needed replacing, wasn't there a bucket of old valves in evidence to prove that the monitor had been cured? He need never know that they had been brought across the square especially for this purpose. After a few bars of powerful dramatic music at full bore, a smile would break across the supervisor's face. "That's wonderful, boys, marvellous." Back the lads would go with their trolley, justly proud of a job well done, and with yet another satisfied customer's OK on their worksheet. A key maintenance man of the time, Ron, arrived at work one Friday and told someone that he'd forgotten to buy fish food for his aquarium the day before. With the weekend imminent, he daren't go home without some. Please remind him not to forget the fish food. This admonition gave the younger fry in maintenance a chance to have a field day. It started out with people all round the building being asked to ring Ron, tell him not to forget the fish food, and then hang up. Even complete strangers, such as delivery men, were conned into walking through maintenance, tapping Ron on the shoulder and whispering, "Don't forget the fish food." His lunchbox contained the same urging, as did letters and special delivery mock-up telegrams sent to him throughout the day. The on-air lights outside the studios flashed, but not with their usual warning, because special templates had been cut to indicate the need for Ron to remember to purchase nourishment for his aquatic creatures. Program monitoring occasionally boomed forth a trio of chipmunk voices, singing incessantly, "Don't forget the fish food! Don't forget the fish food!" Cartons of technical spares arrived for Ron, as a matter of course, during the day's affairs, yet even a packing slip inside a sealed box declared in bold lettering. Yes, you guessed it. Needless to say, Ron did not forget the fish food. Of course, practical jokers have not been confined to those working on the technical staff. There was the occasion when a member of the program staff visited the southeast of South Australia and brought back some crayfish. As he unloaded his car, he accidentally dropped a newspaper-wrapped cray in a corner of the enclosed car park in Hindmarsh Square. It was midsummer, and within a couple of days the heat had accelerated the ripening process, as anyone with a sense of smell could testify. Obviously, the time had come for the offending crustacean to be removed. Quite by chance, a certain member of the staff discovered that on the following day, one of the commissioners of the ABC was to be driven to Broken Hill in an ABC car. Waiting until no one was about, he took the smelly parcel and, no doubt holding his breath, tied it with a piece of wire to the exhaust pipe of the car, well forward and under the front seat. A few days later, on his return from Broken Hill, the driver told us the story. As the car moved north of the state and the exhaust heated up, the odour crept into the inside of the vehicle. The commissioner accused the driver of not keeping his car clean and insisted that he stop and search the back seat and the boot. The driver stoutly denied that he'd been negligent in his duties, but nevertheless did as he was told. He took everything out of the boot and searched the back seat and the floor, but of course found nothing. On they went for another 100 or so kilometres, by which time the stench had become unbearable. The commissioner ordered the driver to stop once again. Then he got out of the car and informed him tersely that he had no intention of getting back in until the source of the stink was discovered. This time the driver crawled underneath and found the cause of the trouble. I don't envy him the task of removing it. Naturally, the perpetrator of the prank never owned up, although he must have been highly diverted when listening to the story of the outcome.